Hi, welcome to the How Do I series for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. My name is Christian Heidedam and I am an engineer on the Microsoft Dynamics NAV team. In this video I will present how do I embed NAV pages on a SharePoint portal. At the end of this video you will know how to embed Microsoft Dynamics NAV web client pages on a SharePoint site, thereby allowing SharePoint users to see and interact with Dynamics NAV without leaving the SharePoint site. To do this, we will be going through 6 steps. In step 1, we will describe the scenarios we want to address and the experiences we want to create. In step 2, we will review the prerequisites for this video. And then we get to the actual steps you need to perform in order to embed NAV on SharePoint. In step 3, we show you how to register NAV as an app in SharePoint, thereby allowing NAV access to SharePoint. In step 4, we show you how to create the SharePoint app. In step 5, we show you how to install the app on SharePoint and to run the app. And in step 6, we will go back and update the SharePoint app to include web parts that can be embedded on SharePoint pages. Let's start by understanding the scenarios and the experiences we want to create. Many companies use SharePoint as the central place where employees go in order to find and enter information. In a way, SharePoint is the internal portal of the company. As a result of this, it is also attractive to integrate Dynamics NAV into SharePoint. With the new features of NAV 2013 R2 that I will demonstrate in this video, it is possible to show, for example, charts inside SharePoint, where the charts are actually generated by Dynamics NAV and show live data from NAV. Let me give you an example. Here I have the Dynamics NAV web client and it gives me all the functionality that I'm used to. It also shows the trailing sales orders chart, which is a key performance indicator for my company. I would like this chart to be shown inside SharePoint, so employees, even those employees that don't use Dynamics NAV all day long, can easily follow the state of the company. This is possible, and let me go back to SharePoint and show you how it looks. You see, we are now in SharePoint and we see the same chart. In fact, it is the NAV web client that is displaying it. The only difference is that it is blended into the general SharePoint experience, and I can even interact with it. Let me give you another example. In the NAV web client, I can see all sales orders, I can open sales orders to see more details, and I can make changes to them. I can also do this directly in SharePoint. And let me show you how that looks. Here you see the exact same sales orders page, and again, it is the NAV web client that is actually displaying it. I can open individual sales orders to see more details. I can make changes. And when I'm done, the SharePoint page shows me the up-to-date information. This is the kind of experience we would like to create. So let's now turn to how we can actually do that. In step 2, we look at the prerequisites for this video. First of all, you need a SharePoint site. Here's my SharePoint site. It is actually a SharePoint online site deployed at this location, but you can also use SharePoint on premises. Furthermore, you need the NAV web client deployed. I have my web client deployed at this address. It is important that you have configured SharePoint and NAV to have single sign-on, meaning that if I sign in to SharePoint and then go to the NAV web client, I'm automatically signed in, and vice versa. If you're using SharePoint on premises, then the natural choice for NAV is to use Windows authentication. And if you're using SharePoint Online, then the natural choice for NAV is to use Office 365 authentication. In order to produce a SharePoint app, we need Visual Studio 2012 and an extension called Microsoft Office Developer Tools for Visual Studio 2012. The extension is available as a free download on the web. In step 3, we will prepare SharePoint for our app. Our goal is to install an app on SharePoint, and there are different ways to do this. One way is to publish the app on the SharePoint Marketplace. This will make the app public and let everyone install it, even people outside our organization. We will not cover this approach. Another way is to do a private installation, where we upload the app directly to SharePoint's app catalog. This is what we will do now. First, we need to register NAV in our SharePoint site. We do that by going to a special page in SharePoint. On this page, we can register a new app. An app has a unique ID and we can generate a new one. It also has a secret and we can generate one. As a title, let's use Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. The app domain and the redirect URI both point to where the NAV web client is deployed. So let's go and see where that is. We can copy the first part of this address and then paste it. In this field we only need the domain, which is this part. And in the redirect URL we need a little bit more, including the HTTPS. And we are done. And the app has been registered now. And we need to remember the client ID for when we create our app. So let's put that in Notepad so it's available for later. We also need a location to which we can upload the app once we have created it. This is called the app catalog. We do that by going to the admin pages of our SharePoint site. On the left hand side you see the apps, and we can create a new app catalog. We will simply call it app catalog and put it to the site collection app catalog. We will assign Stan as the administrator and assign a little bit of storage and press OK. And you can see that it is now preparing this app catalog for us. And now the app catalog is finished. We have now prepared SharePoint for our app and we can turn to actually developing the app. In step 4 we will create the SharePoint app and we will use Visual Studio for that. First we create a new project. Apps for SharePoint, and let's call it NAV SharePoint app. So we have the name, we have a dummy address because we are not using a developer site, and we will choose provider hosted because we as the provider will host it ourselves. We already deployed the NAV web client. So now we have a solution with 2 projects in it, the actual SharePoint app project and a sample website. And we don't need the sample website because we already have the web client deployed. So let's start by removing the sample website. And now we have only the SharePoint app project, and it has an icon that you can change if you want, and there's an app manifest file which is a simple XML file that looks like this. We need to change 2 things. First of all, it needs to point to the NAV web client. And where was that deployed? It was deployed at this address. So let's copy this part. And notice here that I include the web client and the trailing slash, and that is actually important. And we will place this part like that. And we also need to enter the client ID, which has to match the ID that we gave to SharePoint when we registered our app there. Like that. And now we are done, and we can say publish. And now it has produced the SharePoint app file. The app file is actually a zip file, so if you change the extension to .zip, you can look inside and see what it contains. Now that we have the app file, we can install it on SharePoint and run it. The first thing we need to do is upload it to SharePoint's app catalog. And if you remember, we created that app catalog at this address. Apps for SharePoint, and we can click the button, or we can also just drag the file here. Let's drag the file. Now it has been uploaded, and we can go back to the main site. Now we can install the app on any of our sites under this subscription. I'm at the main site here, and I install the app by going to Site Contents, Add an App, select it because now it found it in the app catalog, and trust it. And now it's being added. And it's installed, and I can launch the app. And it would simply open the NAV web client, which is nice, but what we really wanted was to embed NAV pages on SharePoint pages. So that is what we're going to do in step 6. We're going to go back to Visual Studio, update the app and reinstall it, and then embed the pages on SharePoint. First thing we need to do is add a new item to our project. It'll be a client web part, and we will call it list part. And as before, because we already have a website deployed, we will just point it at that. And so we'll enter the same address as the web client, like that. And we will add that it should use the list page, because it is a list that we are embedding. And now you see that it added a new list part with a new XML file, and the XML file looks like this. So it is pointing to the web client, and we need to tell it which page we would like it to show. Let's say 9305, because that is the sales order list. And we also want to say that it should only show, let's say, 5 rows. And normally when the web client is deployed, it will show the navigation pane on the left side, the ribbon at the top, and fact boxes on the right side. And we don't necessarily want to have them shown when the web client is being embedded in another page. So we are going to tell it that it should not show these things. Show navigation, show ribbon, and show UI parts. And we are also going to tell it that it is being embedded like that. And now we're done, and we could publish the project and reinstall it and embed this part on a SharePoint page. But what if we wanted to use many different pages on SharePoint? We've hard-coded 9305 here, but what if we wanted to delay the decision on which page ID to show? Well, we can do that. We can introduce a new property. Let's call it the page ID, and we will have underscores before and after that. You cannot see that here, but these are actually underscores, and that syntax means that it will use the corresponding property that we have defined below here. So let's define a new property. We called it the page ID, and it is of type integer, and we want it to have the default value to be 9305. And we also need to add some attributes here that control the configuration experience. And we're done. So with this we can deploy the app again. We start by publishing it. So we have a new file. Then we need to go to SharePoint and install it. The first thing we need to do is upload it to SharePoint's app catalog. So we do as we did before. We drag the file up there. This time it warns that we are overwriting the file. That's okay. And now it has been uploaded. We can go back to the main page or the main site and install the app on this side. This time we need to uninstall the first version of the app. Now we can add the app again. And now we can go to any SharePoint page on this site. For example, this main site. Edit the site, edit the page. And position the cursor anywhere. And say insert app part. And we select the app part that we created. And now you can see that it is displaying the sales order list. At this point you may encounter two problems. The first problem is that it says that it cannot render the contents inside a frame. The solution to this is to go to the NAV web client web.config file and remove the line that says cross-frame options. The other problem is that it says it cannot render modal dialogues when embedded. The solution to this is to not open any modal dialogues for pages that are being embedded. The prime example of this is the dialog you see when you open the demo database about Kronos International. Well, basically you have to remove that dialog if you want to use the demo database. Now let's go back to our web part. We can configure it. We can say, let's say we want to show not sales orders but customers. Start by modifying the title and say we can control exactly how big it is, and here's the category that we created with one property in it, which is the page number. So let's replace this with the customer list. Say OK. So now it is showing customers, and we can save. And if we click one of these, it will open the customer page, the customer card, and let's say we want to change the name a little bit here. And this is how it works. Now if you remember, we requested that it show 5 rows, and that creates this vertical scroll bar. And we can of course adjust the size a little bit so the scroll bar disappears. So we do that by giving it a little bit more space to show itself. Basically here we are controlling the size of the frame that the NAV web client gets. We may have to do some iterations here to get the size exactly right. Let's say we are fine with this. This looks nicer, and of course you can remove some columns if you think that this horizontal scroll bar isn't nice. And this concludes our demo. I hope you see the value of embedding NAV pages on a SharePoint portal and thereby give your employees or other users access to NAV while they are working in SharePoint. Before we end, I would like to review the steps we took. In step 1, we looked at the scenarios where it could be beneficial to embed NAV on a SharePoint portal, and we looked at an example of what kind of a portal you could create with these capabilities. In step 2, we looked at tools and sites you needed to have in place before you can perform the next steps. In step 3, we registered the NAV app on SharePoint. This is a one-time step. In step 4, we created the app project and the app file in Visual Studio, and in step 5, we installed the app. And in step 6 we essentially repeated step 4 and step 5, where we adjusted the SharePoint project to also include a web part, and we saw how we can embed that web part on a SharePoint page. Thank you for watching this How Do I video. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in another episode of our How Do I video series for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2.